Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Bacon and Coffee. And we have a great guest today. I'm going to start with my 30-second countdown. All right, and it would not be Bacon and Coffee without our intro. Here we go. Right, welcome everybody. I have a great guest today. His name is Tom Agan. Tom, how the heck are you?
Good. Been doing great. It's we've had in the Chicago area. We've had a beautiful snowstorm earlier today, and it's just been wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, we are truly living in a winter wonderland. You're up in Northbrook, I'm in Aurora, so you're up north, I'm out west, and we get different weather, believe it or not, because you get what comes off the lake, I get what's left over, you know.
Exactly. I was thinking a little bit, thinking about what we're doing today, and I'm bringing to the table kind of learnings and trainings, L&T, and you're bringing together bacon. If we sandwich that together, we'll make a BLT today.
I love that. That is awesome.
I don't know if you ever done a BLT on your show before, but
I have never eaten or made a BLT, but this might be the first one. So let's get started. I want people to kind of get to know who you are, and I want to explain why you're on this show. There was a program called Lunch Club, which is still out there. It's Lunch Club. I think it's lunchclub.com. But if not, I can always send everybody a link. Just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll send it to you and you can get an invite. But Lunch Club was this thing when the pandemic hit. It's like you're not getting out meeting people. You're not networking. You join this and it just randomly connects you up with people. And lo and behold, we got connected up. And I just had an amazing conversation with you. And it was inspiring and had a lot of good, juicy, wasn't that crispy bacon? It was kind of the chewy bacon where you had to chew on it a little bit.
Right.
And there was so much good stuff in there. I wanted to have you back on again. And so you're working, well, first and foremost, talk about who you are and what you do. Right. But then secondly, talk about what is your new project? What is this thing that you're working on?
Yeah, so I work in consulting and advising companies all over the world in a number of different areas. A lot of it is around go-to-market, which is a bit of what you and I talked about, how companies can be more effective at engaging their customers. And I do a lot of work in their area, data analytics, how companies need to evolve, that sort of thing. And then in addition to that, it kind of naturally brings me to coaching and helping people, either my own teams or coaching clients. And so that's another area that I do a lot of work in, although that's more of it's a passion, but it's sort of a tangential thing I do in addition to doing my consulting work.
So you, when we talked, you basically, you take a look at data and you kind of interpolate that data, right? I mean,
right,
that's kind
exactly. I mean, yeah, customer data. If you get closer, delve deeper into your customer, most companies can and most teams can dramatically improve their performance. It's just kind of getting into that and diving deeper and getting their heads and souls and spirit that you begin to understand what they really need, and then you can dramatically improve, how you perform.
Right. So in my space, in the online marketing space, one of the things I've run into a lot is perception. It's like people are taught this is what you need to pay attention to. And a perfect example of this is like Google Analytics. When people are looking at websites, they look at the Google Analytics and they look at vanity metrics, like how many hits are they getting? How long are people spending on the page, which is all good. But when you dig deeper into it, and you get to the point where you start to see what pages people are engaging with, how long are they engaging, what's getting you the best stuff. You start to understand what's really working, what's not. And then the other side of that too is the number of hits mean nothing because the vast majority of hits on any website are 8 seconds or less, goldfish territory. So, it's a matter of understanding the the information behind the data that's important to you and
Right.
your business, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that gives you great behavior data, and
Mhm.
behavior data and behavior segmentations, how you organize customers along those lines is very, very powerful. But to your point, it doesn't tell you kind of what's going on in their head, right?
Right.
And that's where you see, companies like In Moment, Verint with Foresee, they do surveys of you to try to find out more about what's going on inside of you to marry up to those behaviors. So they're
Mhm.
looking at, what would be considered direct data, inferred based upon your behavior. So
Mhm.
there are two types of data they look at. And then the third type of data is indirect data. And that's where they're looking at social media, where they're looking at ratings. And then they
Mhm.
combine those three data sets together and then get that deeper insight as to who you are and why you're engaging with the company.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things when people are looking at, just the metrics, they basically say, hey, if we're getting more hits, we're doing better.
Right.
If we're getting less hits, we're not doing as well. And an example of this, I was working with a company. They're getting about 5,000 hits a month, which is pretty good for a
Yeah.
medium-sized company. And that's because they were doing advertising and a whole bunch of other things. And as soon as we turned off the advertising, their hits went down.
Right.
Went down to like 1,500. And, they said, what the heck did you do? We lost all this traffic to our website. And I asked them, so how are your sales? And they go,
Right.
well, they're better. And I said, okay, so what's the problem?
Right.
Right?
Seems like it's working pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. And then from there, we're able to actually raise it back up to 5,000. But the difference is those 5,000 people are actually engaged with their content more. So they were getting better quality people. And that's essentially what we talked about when we had our lunch club was data and the differences between how companies prospered through the pandemic. And again, the numbers that ring in my head, and this may be variable to you, but to me it was 45% of the time they spent on their current customers, 25% on past customers trying to regain them, and then 30% on prospecting. And that mix was the one that you saw the biggest success from. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a big margin potential, a big margin difference between prospecting for new accounts versus going after old,
Hmm.
or old or existing. It's typically much, much cheaper to go after your existing clients and do cross sell, upsell to
Hmm.
them than it is to originate new clients, right? Because that just takes more time, more effort. On
Right.
the other hand, if you're not going after new clients, then you're not going to grow as much, right? So you have to do
Right.
both, but there's sort of a sweet spot in there, which is what the data tends to suggest. 30% new business, new
Hmm.
prospects, new relationships, and then the rest existing relationships, either current or past. And that seems to be the ideal mix to keep you growing, but also to maximize your profitability. I have seen organizations that have focused almost exclusively on existing relationships,
Hmm.
and they don't grow very well, right?
Right.
They may be very, very profitable, and some deliberately make that decision. They decide they want to focus on existing clients because they want to maximize profitability, but
Right.
then their growth suffers. And there's also some other organizational effects as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then one of the key things that I focus on is the difference between leads and prospecting,
Right.
because you see this all the time. It's like I can get you amazing leads, and
Right.
basically, yeah, anybody can get you. I can get you amazing leads too. You just go
Right.
on LinkedIn and you hit up everybody who's got
Right.
whatever sales manager, and you connect them and say, hey,
Right.
you don't know me, but buy my crap,
Right.
and it
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah. I'll sell you a leads list. I'll just spend, like you say, a couple hours on LinkedIn. I'll put a list together and send it to you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but those people, I mean, the know, like, and trust thing takes a while
Right.
to build, and that's what the difference between a lead and a prospect is. A prospect is somebody who's entered their customer journey.
Right.
They've gone from awareness to
Consideration.
education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
the other interesting thing about this, and this is a
mhm,
little bit of a, I guess, a frustration I have with a lot of CRM systems like Salesforce and others,
yep,
is they're so focused on well, really, those CRM systems are basically a financial planning tool, right?
right,
Because they're
right,
tracking your pipeline and what you're doing, and so I can project out, which is hugely important. I mean, I've managed sales teams before, and that's a very, very difficult problem to solve for it. I don't want to
right,
diminish the value of that. However, I've done a lot of work in B2B sales and B2B and B2C selling. And understanding your customer needs and goals to establish relevance is by far the most important way to be successful at sales. So one big investment bank, their investment banking team that was rated, the ones that were rated above average and understanding customer needs, had 8 times more fee income. And what I think we kind of lose sight of when you get into this, into the pipeline and CRM systems, is we kind of lose sight of what's the real driver of success. Yes, effort is, calling on customers, that is important. But what's most important is understanding their needs and goals.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other key important things there too with CRMs is it's only as good as the data that's put in there. And I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but there's still a bunch of people that still use paper and spreadsheets, even if they have CRMs. And if the data is not updated, if it's not massaged, if it's not universal across the board, then you're getting skewed information, right?
And that gets into a little bit of the problem of the value proposition. I've never seen a sales force, the salespeople embrace CRM. It's like a necessary evil, right? And I was just reading a couple weeks ago that something like 80 or 90% of the data in CRM systems is not up to date. Probably it's probably 100%, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's because CRM systems actually don't help them sell very much.
Right.
Like, their problem, as we're talking about, is understanding needs and goals. Well, if my CRM systems are tracking the number of calls I'm making, it's really not getting at the heart of what I, as a salesperson, need to do and understand in order to complete the sale.
Right. And that's one of the things that I primarily focus on, is relationship marketing. And again, I'm not here to promote my business. I'm here to interview you and learn about some new things. But one of the key things with it is that if your sales team is having conversations with people and building relationships with them, that's what a CRM does. That's what social media should do. That's what any of your marketing should do. Is marketing should always lead to a conversation between a salesperson and your perfect customer. Whether it's a prospect or a past customer, a new customer, that doesn't matter. It's their perception of what you're doing is going to be different, but the end result is always the same as to what you want, right?
And the great thing about the data, both in the CRM systems and the other day we're talking about the online experience, is its reality. Like, you can really sink your teeth into that, right? And there's a huge value with that, as opposed to having more subjective conversations. Right. It provides a foundation to start the conversation. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a lot that we can uncover there. But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. And you have a passion project, and it's right there. Career Hacks for You. You can go to Career Hacks for You, and you said it's on YouTube and it's on
TikTok as well. Yep.
Okay. And so
they're short videos. They're only about 2 to 2.5 minutes. So it's pretty painless.
Right. So this is one, if you're an older gentleman or lady, you're going to want your kids to watch, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's the audiences for 20-somethings and 30-somethings.
Exactly. Yeah, they're very much targeted at that kind of age group, that those two cohorts, younger millennials and then Gen Zs.
So what drove you to do this? I mean, what was the thing that triggered you to say, you know what, I need to take my expertise and share it with a younger generation?
Well, there's part of it is this. There's been part of my life I like helping people, right? And that's part of the reason why I'm a consultant. I like helping people solve problems. So that's been a kind of a theme throughout my life from a very early age. And then as I progressed my career and I made, had successes and made plenty of mistakes, I began to sort of talk about those with people who I work with, either, again, my clients or my teams. And people started telling me how valuable that was. And then over time, I was at 2 jobs ago, I was at a firm where they ranked all the leaders in terms of their coaching and mentoring. And globally, I ended up getting ranked either tied for first or number 1. I can't remember exactly.
Nice.
And I think what it started to show was that my, some of the things I'm offering to people and coaching them on, they're seeing huge value in.
So, all right, I grew up in a generation. My dad got a gold watch. I think if my dad was alive today, he'd get an iWatch, But he worked for AT&T. Came out of the Army. He worked for New York Telephone. Then they promoted him to training manager. And I mean, he basically spent 45 years there and basically got a pension, got all those things. And the world is different. The economy is different. The workforce is different. I mean, back then we didn't have computers. We didn't have remote working. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of that stuff. So kids coming out of college, even the kids coming out of college today, their parents went through a different experience, and usually we are a product of our environment, right? So what are the three core takeaways that these kids need to think about when it comes to trying to build a career? Because I mean, career to me was always, you come out of college and let's say you got a civil engineering degree, you went and worked for civil engineering firms. Well, some people that get out of college and they go to a civil engineering firm and they go, you know what, this isn't me. I don't like it. I can't take this. So what are the core things that these people need to think about?
Right. Well, first and foremost, they have to they have to be much more proactive. Excuse me. Well, first and foremost, they have to be much more proactive and take a lot more ownership over their career management. So going back to your dad's experience, there was kind of a pathway for him to advance or roles. He was coached through that. He probably received a lot of training along the way.
Oh yeah.
Over an extended time frame. And back in those days, the interests of the employee were much more tied into the interests of the employer. So, for example, pension plans, not 401k. So if you have a long-term pension plan at a company, you want that company to succeed over the long term, right? So you're going to take actions based upon that. But as this, fragmentation has occurred, as that relationship is broken down, we become much more transactional in our careers. So, when you look at these next generations coming up, some of the estimates say they'll have between 7 and 10 different employers during the course of their career, right? So it's going to be much more churn to it. And as a result, they can't expect their employers, and their employers are not doing this, to invest in their career. Invest in their career development. So what's happening is the conversation is getting kind of muddied. Companies will say, "Oh, we're doing career development." Well, they're doing skills training, right? They're not really coaching people on individually. Okay, here's what you need to do. Here's your career path. If it's a very generic level, what they're doing is trying to push short-term skills on you, which are important. But they're not really looking at that longer term.
Yeah,
so the result,
they're teaching you how to use Salesforce.
right, exactly. And that's career development, right? I mean, that's kind of what it's become. And again, there's value in that. But the fundamental thing that they need to do very differently from us is they've got to own their career. And the challenge with that is we're very, very bad at making decisions about our future. So Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink talks about, do you remember the section where he talks about that you're better off asking a stranger on the street what to do than asking yourself? Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have this, these younger people are in a terrible position, really, because all this has put on their plate. They're not getting that more objective, feedback and coaching. And yet they're, all of us are terrible at making those decisions about ourselves. We have cognitive biases, the illusion of superiority, where we all think we're above average drivers. We're just not good at judging ourselves. Right. And so it's really created a very, very difficult problem,
Yeah, and there's a piece to that too. And again, I don't know if these numbers are accurate. It's not my space, but I've heard it. And the average person is going to stay 3 to 5 years at a company.
Right.
The company doesn't want to invest long term in that person just to have them go somewhere else. So, the old days, the companies would invest in you. They'd send you to training. As a matter of fact, my father, that's what he did. He developed training for Belcore Tech, which was the Bell Systems main training center. They actually built a hotel behind the training center so that people could come and stay there. I worked at Arthur Andersen. We had the Q Center. It was the same thing, right? It was a hotel with a training center. And companies invested a lot of money, time, energy, because they knew that those people would stay there for a long time. So they would get ROI. Nowadays, the ROI with people moving from job to job to job doesn't stand out the way it used to. So obviously one of the things you're going to talk about is you need to take control of your own investment in your own career, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think the millennials get a little bit of a bum rap here, and the Gen Zs, they're often portrayed as being very demanding and very pushy. Well, they have to, they have to be, because they're not getting a lot of help. So, and they have to maximize their career experience. So I think that I kind of push back a little bit on that. There certainly are a couple of key things to take away here. And what a lot of people don't recognize. One is when your income will peak. That has a
Hmm.
huge impact on how you need to think about your career, what that means for leading up to that peak in terms of what that means for your career and building capabilities. And
Hmm.
then there's this notion of how you build presence, because again, if you're churning a lot, you have to really you have to have a lot more command of the situation. You have to have a lot more presence because
Right.
it's so chaotic out there.
Yeah, it is chaotic, and I think having two millennials myself, one in her 30, well, they're both in their 30s and almost mid 30s, and I could tell you that their lifestyle, their values are very different than ours were. I mean, I grew up, and that's something else I think that people got to understand. Is I grew up with my father who went to World War II, grew up
Mhm.
during the Depression. His
Sure.
way of looking at everything was, it was all about possessions and gathering things and getting a house and getting a car, and it was about possessions. And then I grew up in that sphere, and that was important to me too. It's get a
Mhm.
bigger house, do those kind of things. My kids, neither one of them own anything. I
Right.
mean, they rent everything, and the reason is because they would rather take that money and experience things,
Right.
right?
Right.
They'd rather go. My son, he lives in North Carolina. I mean, one weekend he's down in South Carolina at the beach,
Mhm.
in loving that, and the next weekend he's up in the mountains hiking, and doing those kind of things, and he's all over the place. It's like, dude, where do you find the energy,
Right,
right?
exactly. Remember,
Yeah,
we used to have that kind of
I
energy,
know,
right?
I
You and
know.
I did. So
Yeah, but I think that the expectation. So there's this balancing act between not only So the bottom line of what I'm saying, millennials, I get you. I
Mhm.
understand why you do what you're doing, but I also think they get a bum rap from companies because they think they're lazy.
Right.
And they're not lazy. They just
Yep.
have different priorities. They will always get the job done. They just won't get it done from 9 to 5 in most cases, right?
Right. Well, look, going back to talk about our parents, I remember
Hmm.
my dad was my mom were World War II kind of generation as well, and they were complaining about young people in the '70s, right? About how
Right.
they weren't very motivated, and all of
Right.
that as well. So, there's some of this is sort of a generational thing that's also going on. But to your point, there's two things going on. One is a different value set. Another piece of it is they've carried so much student debt that a lot of the data is
Right.
also showing their aspirations for our kind of lifestyle because they've seen it. They kind of still want our lifestyle, but they can't afford it.
Right, right. And so hopefully today we're going to help them
Mhm.
learn how to maximize that and
Exactly.
and and really kind of understand, how to get to the peak of where they need to be.
Right.
So, we talked about the takeaways. What is from the millennial standpoint, I mean, coming out of college and stuff like that, and I'll use millennials as a generic for
Mhm.
Gen Z and everything else, the people that you're talking to. But what is their perceived problem?
Mhm.
What is the thing that they think is going on that they don't understand? Because, like you said, we do have cognitive bias. We think things are one way, when in reality it's something different. So, what are they thinking in their head? What's the problem to them?
Yeah, they're well, there's this perception, and then there's this reality gap, right? Which goes
Right.
back to cognitive biases. The perception most people have is that their income will continue to increase throughout their career. And
Hmm.
the data is very clear, not only in the US, but in South Korea, in the UK, that for most people, their income peaks around the age of 40.
Hmm.
Which is a very sobering thought for a lot of people. It either plateaus or even begins a slow decline, and that's
Right.
consistent across economies. And so the problem is most people aren't even aware of that, and they aren't thinking through the implications of that. Like,
Hmm.
if my income peaks at age 40, then by the time I hit 40, I need to be like well paying down my debt. I have to be living within my means. I certainly shouldn't be taking on more debt, like buying a bigger home or buying a
Right.
vacation home. Like, you really need to do a big shift at that stage in your lifestyle and how you think about your financial planning.
Hmm.
And that's if you hit average, right? Average means that there's people below average whose income peaks earlier. And of course,
Right.
there's, maybe your income will peak later, which is terrific. But
Hmm.
again, for the average person, it's around 40. And that was kind of the case in my case, was true too. I had a big earnings peak around the age 40, and then it kind of bounced around for a while. Sometimes I went a little higher, sometimes I went a little lower. But I haven't really made substantially more than I made in my early 40s. If I'd known that, I would have made very different decisions, including not buying a vacation home. Like, that
Yeah.
was a big disaster. I know, in retrospect, was a very, very bad decision.
Well, it's not as bad as buying a timeshare, but
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, absolutely.
when I think about it, I think you're right because at the time, I mean, when I was in corporate America and I peaked out at about 40, and that was as far as it was going to go. And until I opened my own business and learned how to do something different, but that was you know, that was a lot of work. I mean, it took 20 years to make this work. It wasn't like all of a sudden, you know, the business kicked into gear and made a ton of money. So that's a huge perceived problem, and I think it's hard when you're dealing with the student debt, which I know my kids are still dealing with, and you know, you're dealing with that peak, and you're sitting here going, you know, how do they retire? You know, how do they think about that? How do they change their mindset? So, and I think that the key thing that you talk about is how to take control of it. So then the second part of that is, what is the real problem? What is the economy and business and things doing that is holding them back? Why are they hitting that peak at that time?
Right. Well, it's I think there's a couple things going on, and it's more about us as people. So there's been really great research done on when our innovation potential peaks. So it peaks again in our early 40s. What I mean by innovation potential, there's research done that looked at scientists and Nobel Prize winners, but also inventors of things like things that are sold. And it was very, very consistent. And for all those different cohorts, looking at thousands of people, that their performance or their likelihood to make a major invention or a significant scientific discovery occurs in your early 40s. It's becoming, it's shifting out a little bit, older and older. The theory is it's because there's more and more things to learn, but it's very much around that time. So that, you know, but what's the underlying reason for that? Well, then I ran across some research that just came out a year or two ago, which shows that our cognitive abilities peak around the age of 35, begin a slow decline, which also accelerates in our early 40s. I think there's a couple of, you know, fundamental things going on here, and that's why we see this, I think, pattern occurring across many countries, is because there's things going on with us that naturally lend towards a performance peak in your early 40s. Now, all that being said, right, I don't want people to discriminate against people like you and I who are a little later in our career. The data also shows that somebody who's 55 is 7 times more likely to make a significant discovery or invention than someone who's 25. Even a 65-year-old is 3 times more likely. So part of this too, the societal part of this, there is a perception that the great innovators are in their 20s, and you know, and that's not true. I mean, there are people like that. I'm not saying that they don't exist, the Zuckerbergs and those, but the reality is the innovation peak is 42, and there's a very long tail to that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of different pieces of this. When you look at technology, right? Technology is obviously very forefront in our mindsets, considering, you know, we have smartphones, we have, you know, heck, we're talking to each other, you know, remotely on desktop computers, and this is being broadcast all over the world. I mean, you know, 20 years ago, this wasn't around. And technology tends to be what a lot of people think is a young kid's game, you know, because they've grown up with it, they understand it. But I mean, I've been working, you know, I think one of the key things that people misunderstand is that there's knowledge acquired over time that can actually be utilized in ways. And again, you know, I'm not trying to sing my praises, but one of the stories I tell is back in the 1970s when I opened up my first business was a recording studio. I was doing content marketing back then. And everybody says, wait a minute, 1979, there was no internet, there's no nothing. How did you do it? Well, an Atari 400 computer and a dot matrix printer, right? And I typed up stories. Yes, there were tons of typos in there. Everybody knows me. They sucked. But I did it. I cut them up. I put it on 11 by 17 piece of paper. I sent it to a printer, folded it up, and mailed it to people. And, you know, today, how do we do that? Email, text, you know, it's the content and the concept that goes into it, and the experience of what worked, what didn't, that you can bring to the table as you go through it. But that innovation, you know, the kids tend to have the you know, the peak of what's happening with technology, because that is changing so fast, and they have grown up with it,
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's say, you know, as we also have to look at the absorption, how quickly companies can absorb innovations, right? So let's say, you know, I as a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, I do have a new idea. I understand a technology that and the potential, the implications of it, which most of the older people in my company don't understand. It takes time. Like this is another thing where this kind of churning really works against companies and individuals, because it may take 10 years for a company to absorb and really understand new technology and use
Right.
it. It might take 20 years. And so if you're on the leading edge of that in a company, it takes time, which goes back to your telephone example. There's Bell Labs, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they knew they had to invest over the long haul, and it would take time to absorb that. But again,
Right.
that kind of infrastructure has gone away. So now you have even more pressure on the younger people where they do understand things that the older people in organizations don't understand. I've seen that. I've experienced that directly fairly recently.
Right.
And at the same time, they're moving around so much, they can't focus on making it happen. And so the companies lose out. The companies lose out because they're losing the value and the benefit of that.
And so with that being said,
Mhm.
with that innovation and people moving around, what's the solution
Right.
for the millennials and things like that
Yeah.
they need to, what do they need to take into their own hands in order
Right.
to, number one, prepare themselves for that peak, but also optimize that peak?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so it kind of we sort of work backwards from your income peaking at around age 40. I think what's really going on is up to the age of 40, you see your income increase very rapidly
Hmm.
for most people, and so the wind is kind of behind your back, right? It's pushing you forward. You have a lot of momentum, and when you hit 40, you're like the wind dies down, and now you're rowing, right, to keep
Right.
going forward, right? And so what that means is the important golden window of your career is going up to the age of 40 and going back to Gladwell's book, in this case Outliers. He
Right.
makes the case that it takes 10 years to master something, right? 10 years,
Right.
10,000 hours. And there's been some criticism of that, but because he doesn't really take into account the quality of the practice and all that. But at the same time, it takes 10 years to make a partner in a consulting firm. It takes 10 years to become a licensed doctor. I mean,
Right.
there's some I think some truth. There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
So if you want to be, peaking, you want to master a subject, right? And you want that to happen certainly by the age 40, and it takes
Hmm.
10 years to do so. That means that career window between age 30 and 40 is the golden window for you to master a topic.
Right.
And so that becomes a critical period in one's career that you have to stay focused. It's just so important not to shift around. I shifted focus a lot, and that was, in retrospect, a bad
Yeah.
idea, right?
Right.
Uh,
Who hasn't?
right, exactly. I've done probably a little more than most, but anyway. And in any event, that window of staying focused, mastering a topic, so by the time you hit 40, right, and the
Mhm.
wind has died down, you just have momentum to keep sailing forward.
Right. So going back to the points that you're
Mhm.
making, kind of laying out a timeline. So I'm imagining a kid coming out of college, usually 25, 26 by the
Right,
time they're done, right?
right,
Unless they're going for a doctorate or something or master's, could be a little bit older. But basically, they have 5 or 6 years to get their sea legs, right?
right,
To figure
exactly.
out. And I think one of the key things is there's a big difference between a job and your passion.
Right,
And how can you take that passion and turn it into, because really, I mean, it's really hard to innovate when really all you're doing is
right,
showing up to a desk and performing a task,
right,
right? You really need to kind of define what your passion is by age 30-ish,
mhm, right.
and then start building upon that. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. If you can discover it. I mean, it's very
Right.
rare. If you think of our own lives, right? I
Right.
didn't really know anything. Well, I still don't know a lot, right? But certainly at the age of 30, I didn't. It's hard to have that level of self awareness, right?
Right.
It's just very difficult to do that. And again, you're not getting coaching for it. And keep in mind, you may have jammed an MBA in that, right? So you
Right.
have like 3 years of experience and 2 years of school, and now you're faced with the most critical period in your career.
Right.
So, I think you're fortunate if you find something you like. I think what becomes a little bit more of the discussion, and I have this with people in that 20 to 30, in that 30 to 40 time frame, is you may not be crazy about what you're doing, but the cost of switching and the risk of switching is so high. You're kind of probably better off to figure out how to make it work.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and it is high, but if you don't like what you're doing, you better find
Well,
that
yeah,
out.
yeah, no,
It's
no,
called
no
fail
question.
fast, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
basically, just figure out that you don't like it. So,
And in a
with
sense, they're doing that, right? By job hopping, they're
right,
trying to figure it out. They're exploring that. So,
right,
yeah, I mean, look, I think you're very, very fortunate if you discover, what you're passionate about early in your life and you can follow through with it.
hmm,
At the same time, I think you really need to look at kind of the data and kind of manage your career around this income peak.
yeah, and So with that being said,
Mhm.
so now we know that there's that income peak and you have that passion. What is so we understand the solution. We now have a time frame that they need to think about and what needs to happen. They need to basically find a course, optimize themselves throughout that course till they get to 40. So when they hit that peak, they're actually they can almost like trajectory themselves
Right,
further out, right?
right, right.
As opposed to when they hit 40, they hit their peak and then they try to discover who they are. So they need to try to
Well,
figure out
but
doing that
that's
earlier.
the reality. I mean, I
Right.
mean, in a sense, that's kind of what I, have gone through. It's only been probably the last 10 years. I've actually really
Hmm.
discovered some of the things I'm really interested in and am really good at. And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's the reality of how life works.
Well, and I don't disagree with you. I mean, I started
Yeah.
this company 20
Yeah.
years ago in 2001, and back then, you know, this was just at the very, very beginning of the internet and all the things that we have. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We had cell phones, but we didn't have smartphones. The World Wide Web was wide open west,
Mhm.
and it was just crazy. And it took a long time for it kind of to settle in.
Right.
So you still are, even throughout all of that, you've got to continue to invest in yourself, continue to learn, continue to grow,
Mhm.
and be open to those things. It's not like you just hit that path and just kind of glide through it, right?
Right.
So what's the
Well,
process? I mean,
well,
what do
also,
you need to think about?
let me just, I want to add one other thing.
Sure.
These things we have, right? These kind of smartphones that we're all using now
Hmm.
is an exceptional disruption. Mobile is exceptional disruption. I'll put it in this context. Your keys and clothing that you have. Well, your clothing comes from the Paleolithic period, prehistory, right?
Right.
Your keys and money come from the Mesolithic period, right? Your glasses, your watch comes from the Middle Ages. This is the first thing in 600 years that we deem essential to have on us at all times.
Right.
And I think it's a little risky in some respects to think about, oh, this last period is typical of what's going forward. It's really been an exceptional period, and it's highly unlikely that the people coming along now are going to face this kind of disruption. They'll be
Right.
trying to figure out how to apply it, how to integrate it, how to exploit it. But that's another thing I think we have to be, particularly younger people who have seen, a once in 500 year experience
Right.
change unfold, to think that's going to continue forward is probably pretty unlikely.
Right. I equate the invention of the smartphone to the printing press. I mean, the
Right,
printing press was the most disruptive thing in between because now it took knowledge and put it out to the masses.
right.
Where only people who could get handwritten books could read
Yeah.
and use that. So it's just now we have this data capturing device, but also data gathering device sitting in
Right.
our
And
pockets.
and the disruption is immense. I mean, going back to the printing press, Gutenberg printing press,
Hmm.
I don't think it's a coincidence that 50, 60 years later, you have Martin Luther, who becomes essentially a best-selling author, confronting the Catholic Church and causing the Protestant religion to emerge,
Right.
and a fundamental change in the relation of power a fundamental change in a power relationship occurring because
Right.
of that disruptive technology. And we're seeing the same thing now. I mean, we're seeing a tremendous amount of disruption around elites, authority, based upon this now sharing of information, as well as the authorities kind of exploiting it for their own ends, of course,
Well,
too.
that too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Google and Facebook and all that
Right.
stuff.
Right.
Okay, so let's go through the
Mhm.
processes. Now, you're a millennial. You're at your 30s.
Right.
What are the things that you need to think of to optimize everything to get to your 40s and kind of
Right.
ride that tide?
Well, first of all, is to think of an area of focus, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't. I mean, in the old days, one focus would be you stay at a company, right? And that's for all practical purposes gone, right? Unless you work
Right.
the government. I mean, that you can be very focused on law
Hmm.
enforcement parts of government. So there still is a large part of our economy, the government economy, where you still can do that, right?
Hmm.
And potentially get a pension if it's properly funded, right? We're both in
Right.
Illinois. We know the problems up here.
Oh yeah.
These poor
Yeah.
people may never get a pension or whatever. So that's part of it, right? And in fact, when I coach people, if you're going to government work, you actually do want to look at the finances of that state, right? Because if
Hmm.
you're going to make less money now, and you're counting on pension, you don't want to go to a state and work in a state where that's not going to pay off for you. So
Right.
you still have that as a model you can still pursue, but it's not in the private sector. In the private sector, then it becomes okay. Where do I focus? Do I focus on an area, a functional area like HR, marketing? Do I focus on a particular skill set? Like I want to be the best Python programmer. Do I
Hmm.
even want to focus on geography? I know people have very successful careers. They say, okay, I'm just going to stay in the Chicago area, right?
Hmm.
And I'm going to work the local network, the local community to kind of drive my career forward.
Right.
And then networking, if you're going down these more functional paths, networking is critical. Like in the old days, again, you just pretty much had to network, and it was only really feasible to network within your company. You might go to a conference every once in a while. I might switch companies, but that was relatively rare. Whereas
Hmm.
today, Lunch Club that you referenced earlier, LinkedIn, that taking control, investing more in networking is hugely important.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And I always say that you're basically the sum of the connections that you
Right.
have.
Right.
Another book that I think is really kind of uber important, and I cannot remember his first name, but the last name is Harari, and it's called *Sapiens*.
Mm,
And if you've read it, basically what it talks about is that from our brains and from our history as beings, we've always been in tribes. And these tribes, it's not the tribes that Seth Godin talks about. These are true tribes of about 150 people. And even companies like Gore-Tex figured out that if they built a parking lot with 150 spaces, as soon as that parking lot got filled up, they'd build another factory because they found that there was an optimization around that.
mm,
And one of the things that I think that millennials don't do as well is they usually have a core group of friends that stick with them for the longest time, right?
right.
So that they'll have those 5 people that they went to high school with, and they get married and they get divorced, and they kind of go through it's kind of like How I Met Your Mother. It's an
Mhm.
episode of that. But more importantly, part of what you've got to do in networking is start to identify those 150 people within your sphere of influence that you can stay in touch with,
Right.
meaning that it should be people in your industry, it should be friends, it should be mentors, it should be even vendors. I mean,
Mhm.
just how do you build that tribe of people that help support you and guide you and give you advice and basically help you get out of your own way, right?
Right. Well, it's actually become easier in a way because I think we all begin to appreciate the situation we're all in.
Hmm.
So, sometimes I'll reach out to somebody I haven't worked with for 10 years, 15 years, and they're almost, if they reach out to me, I'm going to help them out. And,
Right.
the vice versa, where, I don't think that was so much true, when you and I were growing up. So
No, right. It wasn't, but I think the key thing is that we don't, if they're not in our purview. So
right.
one of the things I think that happens, and this is kind of goofy, but this goes back to I remember, when Facebook first came out, it's like, whoa, I got 500 friends. It's like it was like collecting chips or trying to get as many golden coins as
Mhm.
you possibly could. And not focusing on the quality of the
Right.
relationships and identifying those. And the bottom line is that yeah, it's easier with LinkedIn and Lunch Club, and there's tons of Zoom group meetings. I mean, I go to some that have 150 people in them. Not all of those 150 are going to stay in that connected area. So I think one of the things that these people have to do is start to identify the relationship to the goal. Would you
Right.
agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you do want to have, you want to have that friend relationship, obviously, but having that focus on, okay, if I want to be in marketing, I want to prioritize the marketing contacts I make. I want to make proactive reach outs to other
Hmm.
marketers. Like you kind of want to think of there's sort of a Venn diagram. There's overlap because a lot of times your friends are from work. But
Right.
you want to have kind of think of sort of two lenses you want to put on your social network to
Hmm.
move it forward. The other thing is interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but just in the last week or two, there was some research that came out that showed people for looking for jobs. Most of those leads, most of those leads, come from these sort of transient or weak, what they call weak relationships, like you make on Lunch Club or you
Hmm.
make on LinkedIn. It was I can't remember the numbers exactly, but I think it was 28% of people's eventual jobs came through these sort of more transient relationships. Only 17% came through long-term relationships. So this notion also, as you take a focus to not only be focused on long-term relationships, but be very active at making short-term relationships with people,
Right.
because that is probably even more likely for you to lead to the kind of career options and the jobs you want.
Yeah, I had an interesting thing happen just yesterday. As a matter of fact, one of my one of the people that work for me, she's project manager out of Phoenix. sent me something that says, "Is this brother from another mother or somebody who stole your brand?" And it was a company called eBacon was hiring a online marketing person.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, eBacon out of Phoenix, and they do they're working in the financial world. And lo and behold, one of my friends who just basically said, "Hey," or he went on LinkedIn and said, "Can I call you?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm having some issues and I might be leaving my company. If you hear of anything, let me know." And I go, "Dude, I just got this from somebody I know, and this might be perfect for you because I don't want it. I'm not going to eat that bacon. You want to eat that bacon? Here, let me send you the info." It's just those random things that happen, right?
Yeah, last night I actually registered thebacon.com. So
Ah,
I was actually, when we get done here, I was going to offer to sell that to you. But anyway,
yeah, right. Trust me, I bought a lot of bacon
oh,
URLs over the years.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I bought one URL, and it's a pretty good one. And then somebody bought it a couple years later and just put an S at the end of it. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
oh,
Yep.
why didn't I think of that option?
Yeah, and yeah, you could do that. I mean, there's another guy I know that does nothing but buy and sell domains and
Right.
makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing it.
Yeah.
But we digress, right?
Yeah.
We've kind of moved off the topic a little
Yeah.
bit. So getting back to that,
Mhm.
we talked about our network. We talked
Mhm.
about making those connections. Is there anything? What about learning? What about
Right.
investing in ourselves? Because obviously, one of the things that has been um probably the saving grace for me is I've been one of those people. My dad taught me this at an early age, being a lifelong learner and investing in myself and realizing I'm not the smartest cookie in the cookie jar. And I've got to constantly up my skills and learn new things. But you got to make sure that you focus too, right? Because you
Mhm.
can go down so many different rabbit holes that
Right.
so how do you find what you need to learn, focus on it, and invest in yourself to
Yeah.
do it? I think that's really key for these people.
Yeah, I think there's those two pieces of it, figuring out what you want to focus on, and then being disciplined enough to stay focused in that learning.
Hmm.
And I'm not an expert on that. It's sort of like a little bit don't do what I do,
Yeah,
a little
right.
bit, because I kind of get a little unfocused at times and look at a lot of different things.
Hmm.
So it's tough though. It's really tough to both have the motivation, understand what you want to look at, and do
Hmm.
it. Right, it takes time.
Right.
One thing I used to get kind of guilty about, we have a family, 3 kids, that sort of thing, is I would read a lot. And I would feel kind of guilty because there's stuff around the house I need help with, and
Right.
kid stuff. And then one day my wife said, "Yeah, but that's part of your work."
Right.
It's reading and staying current on things.
Right.
So, and that was like, yeah, and I stopped feeling kind of so bad about it. So there is
Yep.
some pieces that of understanding the value of it, integrate
Hmm.
it into yourself, and
Right.
that helps stay motivated to do it. So yeah, learning. And interesting enough, I did research about 10 years ago on innovation.
Hmm.
And if you look at innovation, most people think, oh, you got to come up with the what's called ideation, these sessions where you come up with ideas. If you have an innovation problem, that's what you need to do. When I actually looked at the data in this research, that had very little impact on innovation success, revenue for new products. What
Right.
had the biggest impact by far was whether they did debriefs after a product launch, if they actually went and talked about and documented what worked and what didn't work.
Right.
That impacted revenue for new products, at least 400% more revenue, the companies that did that. So the importance of learning, for your mistake in that context is huge. And that would, I think,
Hmm.
apply to any individual as well.
I love it. There's a couple of things that you brought up that I want to touch on. One was a meme that I saw yesterday. It said, "If you have time for cleaning, you're not reading enough." Um, and the second one is, one of the challenges with reading, and some people like one of the things I learned young is that I'm an auditory learner, right?
Right.
So I said to myself, okay, I can read books, but I can't comprehend what's in them. But if I
Mhm.
listen to them, I gather a lot. So I've taken up the audiobook side of things. And audiobooks are great, but I mean, it's 4, 6, 8 hours of listening to these things. And I mean, if you don't write down everything inside of these books, you really don't retain a lot of it because
Right.
from the beginning to the end, it's a long time.
Right.
And reading a book, you can speed read it in a day, and kind of consume it, but it's really hard to, have something in your ears for 8 hours and just focus on that.
Mhm.
So one of the things I learned to do is I walk my dog 3 times a day. And so I bought ear pods or
Oh,
AirPods,
nice.
And then I listen to Blinkist. I don't know if you're familiar with Blinkist or not, but there's a ton of these kind of things out there. But basically, it's Cliff Notes for books, right? And the coolest thing about it is it takes you down rabbit holes. So, for example, you start with a philosophical question, you put it in, you listen to a book on philosophy, and the next thing you know, you're listening to ancient Greek history and gods. Just take and you probably would never listen to these books on your own. You wouldn't go, you know what? I think I want to learn about Zeus. I want to learn about Hades because that's going to help my business. No, but when you start getting that stuff and you start synthesizing and understanding, from a marketing standpoint, it's like, wait a minute, what makes people believe in these gods? What do these gods represent? How do they react today? What's different in today's world? You start getting all of these connections. And so I think one of the things from a hack standpoint, since we're talking about career hacks, is how can you optimize the way that you do this in a way that fits into your lifestyle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the hardest things is spend less time on social media.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It was kind of funny. I consider myself, I've been in tech for a long time and experiences. I'm pretty up on, kind of the techniques that are used to sort of, bring people in and make these experiences addictive and things like that. So a couple of years, over the last like maybe 2 years ago, I'm kind of going, I'm not reading as much. What's going on? And I'm like, why is it that I'm not reading? And it's just, I'm not connecting anything, right? So then I watched Social Dilemma, right?
Oh, yes.
Talks about it. And I'm like going, oh my, and then I look like on my smartphone and on my computer, I realize I'm spending like tons of time on YouTube, right? Watching all this stuff. Oh my gosh, I've gotten sucked into this thing, over time. And here I am, I consider myself a relatively sophisticated user, and it's taken me over. So I delete my YouTube app. I delete, I take it off my browser, and sure enough, I start reading again, books again.
Yeah, and it's easy to do. I mean, this stuff is designed to be as addicting as Coke, cocaine or Coca-Cola.
TikTok is frightening.
Like,
I don't know if you've been on it. I mean, I am. I mean, look, it's a two-edged sword, right? I have videos on TikTok and YouTube. It's a way of reaching people, right? On the other hand, TikTok is just terrifying. As soon as you go in, it starts pounding these video clips on you, and if you don't turn it off soon enough, it sends you more of that.
Right, and you got 2 hours later, you're still watching,
you're watching these 2-minute
some
clips.
Monkey playing, ukulele. It's like, what the heck is this?
It's
wow, that's cool.
It is terrifying.
Right. Yeah, it can easily do a lot of damage to your time. I mean, that's really it. So again, you can't manage time, but you can manage what you can do with time. So you basically, one of the hacks is you got to figure out how to manage your time, right? And do this stuff. Okay,
and have the self-discipline for that, which is hard. And I think the last piece of this puzzle is taking more command of the situation.
Right.
So you're in these very chaotic environments. People are coming and going. And incidentally, it's not just young people. What I've really been surprised about in the last sort of 10 years, 5 years, is I'll go meet with a C-level executive at a big global company. I mean, really, really important companies.
Yep.
And you talk to them, maybe a chief marketing officer, and they go, yeah, I'll be here probably 3 or 4 years. These are the things I'm going to get done. And then when I get done with that, I'll go find another job.
Right.
So it's not just, the younger people are impacted this, but it's more, I think, extreme for the younger people. So you're in this chaotic environment, how do you take command of it? And I think an important piece of that is how you present yourself to people. So in other words, people have a very bad tendency, particularly younger people, although I do it sometimes too, which is to ask a leading question. So they'll say, oh, do you think, they'll be saying to me, do you think we should go meet with Emma? Right. And clearly they think it's a pretty good idea, right? But they're phrasing it as a question. So they come across kind of tentative and I think lacking some conviction. Instead, I coach them to say, if I think we should go meet with Emma, what do you think?
Right.
And I think it not only does it create more presence for them, I've noticed it helps them get more confident in their own opinions.
Right.
Like it builds their own confidence. It gives them more of a sense of, an overworked term right now is agency, but being making their own decisions, getting comfortable with that. And I've seen dramatic transformations in people when I help them with that. And it's really annoying because I'll tell them I want this, and they'll come up to me and they'll go, "Oh, Tom, do you think we should go meet with Emma? And I'll go, well, what do you think?
Right, right.
And so they'd say, it is one of the most annoying things you
Right.
do.
Damn you.
But at the same time, they go, it's pretty important. There is an important caveat to this. I have also had bosses who weren't that interested in my opinion. And in those cases, I do ask questions.
Yeah, right.
So you gotta read your audience for that one.
Right, exactly. All right, so it's hard to believe that we are at we've basically got 6 minutes left, so we're in the home stretch. So the last thing I want to bring up is what's in it for them if they do this? What's the outcome? What can they expect from this, and why do they want to do it? So what's the key?
Yeah, you're really speaking to their status. Right? If they become a recognized expert, they're going to be there's huge status implications in terms of how people respond to you, how people reach out to you, and having higher status is generally a good thing, right? I don't mean it in an oppressive way. I just meant of being respected, being part of the conversation. So there's a whole status piece to it. There's the economic side of it, right? Optimizing your career to maximize your wealth. And then there's simply, kind of a functional employment piece of it, right? Which kind of intersects a bit with the financial piece. But a lot of it, I think the primary motivation is for people to want to be respected. They want to be included in a group. And if the group is chaotic and fluctuating, that's hard to do. But if you have status and you're included in a group, you're going to have a much, much happier life.
Yeah. So what is, and this is maybe a tough question for you to answer, but it's always been a tough question for myself to answer, is like, how do you know when you've achieved it? How do you know when you've achieved status? Because, we sit here and question ourselves all the time, right?
Right. I think when it happens is when, in my case, the way when I believe I have achieved some status is when somebody says to me, something you said, helped me, had a big impact. I mean, I'm so grateful that something we talked about had an impact on you and had an impact on one of your clients, right?
Yeah, it did.
And that to me is very rewarding. Other people, it's going to be about money, and that's fine too. Right? And hopefully those two intersect, right? You have high status and you're making a lot of money. But I think those are two very, very, very important drivers.
Yeah, they are very important drivers. But the key thing I think that's most important in all of this is be open to talk to other people. And one of my, I call them baconisms. But one of my baconisms is every doctor needs a doctor, every mentor needs a mentor, every coach needs a coach. And you should always, basically search out in that 150, somebody who can mentor you, somebody who will coach you, somebody who will doctor you,
Absolutely. I have two coaches who I've worked with for 20 years, right? And two very important ones. And I have other people I reach out to for advice, constantly as well. So absolutely, that's a critical piece. But again, because there's so much chaos, to have that kind of continuity over time is just absolutely critical. Taking command of the situation, staying focused, have those long-term relationships. At the same time, going back to prospecting new versus existing, being out there, making those contacts to kind of keep things fresh and keep you engaged in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that being said, we're down to our last couple of minutes. So talk a little bit about your channel and what people can expect from that.
Well, right now I just launched it. It has three 2.5 minute videos, so they're very, very short and pretty painless, I think. And the first ones are on your income peaking at age 40, your golden career window from age 30 to 40, and then executive presence. And I hope I'll be continuing to build that out. Probably the next ones might be about storytelling, how to communicate more effectively, and that'll probably be the next one. But I'm going to continue to build this out over time, and it's just for people to benefit from. I mean, I would say of my coaching, maybe 10% of it is paid. 90% of it is for friends and family. My last job, I still have a lot of people there calling me for career advice. So, and that's great.
It's again, you've reached a status, with people that they want to reach out to you, which I think is huge. And so that's awesome. And so if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that? Find you on LinkedIn, or what do you suggest? And if they want to follow you and all that stuff, obviously go to the YouTube channel. But
and LinkedIn is, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn these days. I also have a Gmail address, career hacks for you @gmail.com. So if they want to email me, but usually it's easier if they just message me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been great, man.
Yes.
A
Thank
lot
you,
of good.
Brian.
It was fun. It was.
Do we get the BLT made, do you think?
I think we did make the BLT. Yes. If nothing else, I think everybody's going to leave here with a desire for more bacon. You know, that's
Right.
the whole thing about bacon is,
Right.
you know, there is never enough bacon. You can
Right.
always use more. So, bottom
Well,
line, I think we need to go make a sandwich.
it's so shocking, when I was thinking about BLT, obviously, because I was kind of thinking
Right.
about this our time together today, and I was thinking about, if you actually think of the BLT without the bacon, like if you had a lettuce, tomato with mayonnaise and toast,
Yeah.
it's sort of disgusting, right? And you
Yeah.
put bacon into it, and it's transformative.
It is. Well, bacon makes everything better. It is the duct tape of food, by the way. You can put bacon on anything, it's going
You,
to make it better.
you
Even
can do
breakfast
it,
cereal, right?
man.
So, all right, my friend, I
Okay.
appreciate you and your time. Thanks for coming on, everybody. And this has been Bacon and Coffee. We will see you again, same time next week. Have a great one. Thanks.